I want to welcome to you, our viewers at home and around the world, to this special program with one of the political parties that will contest the next election on March the 2nd. I want you to call your friends and family and ask them to tune into GlobeSpan 24/7. It's on Facebook and on YouTube, and you can also get a link from ANUG Facebook as well. So I want to welcome you, and I want to also give thanks to Mr. Nohar Singh, who has been very, very good in presenting these programs to the world at large. And of course, to our technical personnel, Devin, for doing such a wonderful job. Again, good evening here from New York. Tonight, a very revered greetings to our Hindu brothers and sisters as they observe the great festival of Mahashivratri, the celebration of the birth of Lord Shiva. May the blessings of Lord Shiva permeate our country as we enter into the election period. Election is in the air. Today, the disciplined services, the army, the police, the prison service, and others casted their vote in 52 polling stations across Guyana. This marks the beginning of the March 2nd, 2020 general and regional elections. Based on report, the process went smoothly. There was, however, numerous situations where the persons who present themselves to vote did not have their ID card. The Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Lowenfield, said that if someone comes to the voting booth without an ID card, they will not be turned away, because there's a process that follows should this happen. And the process, I'm told, is that you will go to the the presiding officer, and he or she will check your name against the voters list and match your picture with the person, and then you will swear to an affidavit that you are the person. And I think that is basically the process, and then you'll be allowed to vote. With a population of approximately 700,000 or 80,000 persons, the final list of electors contains 661,028 names. Now, one can argue that this is a recipe for a fraudulent election. Guyana have had elections before our independence and many elections since. A reasonable person would say that the elections in 1964 was the last free and fair elections for at least 3 decades. Within that period, we had elections in 1968, 1973, a referendum in 1979, elections in 1980 under the new constitution, and in 1985. The international communities and most Guyanese believed that all these elections were rigged. In 1992 election under President Hoyt was certified by observers and the Guyanese people as the first free and fair elections after independence. Elections that follow 1992 are believed to be free and fair. Some have expressed some doubts about its fairness, especially with the seemingly biased Guyana Elections Commission, who were sympathizers of the PPP when they awarded a seat in Region 10 to the PPP, which was in fact won by the AFC in 2006. The same can be said in the 2015 elections, where the Guyana Elections Commission awarded the geographic seat for Region 8 to the APNU AFC ticket with a majority of 1 vote. The big question tonight before us is, when does free and fair election begin and where does it end? Looking at our history and having lived under the administration of the PPP, the PNC, and now APNU AFC, I posit to our viewers tonight that the political parties who have governed our country from 1964 to now, 56 years, don't care a damn what it means for a free and fair elections once the Elections Commission declares the winner of the elections, that is, who becomes the president. The experience over the last 56 years have been a continuation of dictatorial presidents who govern a nation as if they were a dictator. Can we allow this to continue? Or the real question should be, should we allow this dictatorial presidency to continue? Before we get an oversight of the manifesto of ANUG, I would like to take a few steps back and look at the body politics of Guyana. After the split of the Jagan and Burnham faction of the PPP in the 1950s, we have had a very polarized nation since. Despite many attempts by third parties, and there were many, none has been able to break the cycle of ethnic voting, as we say, racial voting. Walter Rodney started an excellent movement touching the mind and soul of the nation, where we saw a wide cross-section of Guyanese of all ethnic groups coming together. Sadly, after the assassination of Dr. Rodney, literally brought that movement to an end. In 1992, a new movement called GUARD came into being with leaders like Dr. Isu Prasad, Sam Hines, and others, with weekly meetings at the parade ground. This movement was then absorbed by and large by the PPP to form the civic component of that party. The PPP had Sam Hines from this movement as the prime ministerial candidate. The racial system, however, continued. Another movement started in 2005 with the formation of the Alliance for Change, or the AFC. Many Guyanese placed their trust in this new movement, having lived for 28 years under the PNC, and at that time, 13 years under the PPP. With a member from the PPP, Ramjatan, one from the PNC, Trotman, and one from the WPA, Sheila Holder, many believed that the dream of a Jagan-Burnham coalition was now realizable. But was it? What we did not comprehend was these guys were thrown out of their party, and as is evident in 2015, they were embittered against their former party. Moses joined, and the damage is now done. Kemraj and Moses wanted to so badly destroy the PPP that they coalesced with the party that almost destroyed them in their former party. Trotman, some may say, went back home. In its formation in 2005 and until the 2011 elections, the AFC was adamant that they will never be a part of the PPP nor the PNC. History will hold them in contempt. Today, we will look at the manifesto of one of Guyana's newest party, a new and united Guyana, ANUG. I am pleased to have with us tonight one of the architects of the manifesto and also a founding member of that party. He is no stranger to us. He's an attorney at law and stated repeatedly that he thoroughly enjoyed his profession by representing a wide cross-section of Guyanese in our courts, and politics is not part of that equation. I want to welcome Mr. Timothy Jonas to the program tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sugrim.
Okay, Mr. Jonas, before we get into the manifesto itself, I want you, in your own words, to tell our viewers your view of the state of our political environment in Guyana as it is today, and what led us into the formation of ANUG.
The history of Guyana that you recounted, our political history, the friendship and then enmity of Burnham and Jagan, the fact that their legacy really is an ethnically divided political landscape that reflects the ethnic balance of the population. I think that you accurately recounted it, and it's difficult to improve on that. And I do also appreciate the fact that you took a middle line. I did not detect any preference one way or another, PNC, APNU, or PPP in your history lesson there. You're quite right. There have been third parties have tried, third parties have failed. I want to start the discussion though with the AFC, because the AFC taught us something. When the two parties monopolize the political landscape, they rely on their voter base. And that reliance on the voter base is based entirely on ethnicity, ethnic loyalty. It creates blind party loyalists who couldn't care less about the quality of their leaders, about the corruption of their leaders, the competence of their leaders. They vote for their leaders because of this ethnic affinity and because of insecurity that in our winner-take-all situation, if those other people win, and it's always those other people, if those other people win, we don't get contracts, we don't get awards, we get left out in the cold. Now, in order to perpetuate this monopoly that the two parties have, this duopoly, if you will, one thing's important. It's important to keep the people in a state of poverty and in a state of ignorance. When you do that, you are in a stronger position that the people will, in an unthinking way, support you blindly because you look like them, no matter how badly you treat them. And if you think about it, some of the most ardent, fanatical supporters of either party come from the rural, poor areas where there's high unemployment, high poverty, high domestic violence, high alcohol abuse. And that's where you see the most fearsome polarization. And that says a lot. For that reason, when, despite the corruption and poor leadership by the PPP, Guyana's economy, having been bolstered by Hoyt's economic recovery program, which transformed the economy, and to Jagan's credit, he did not try to change. You saw a small growth in the middle class in Guyana, in the number of educated people, the number of professionals, the number of people who were able to be independent-minded. And that middle class grew, and you saw the symptoms. We have private schools. You see the number of vehicles on the road. You see the signs of middle classdom, the number of Guyanese who travel abroad. And as that middle class grew, so too grew independent thought. People willing to think for themselves, to recognize the harmful ethnic political environment and to reject it. And as those numbers grew, the AFC taught us in 2006 that at last, that small minority of independent thinkers and independent voters who had risen above ethnic politics was at long last large enough to carry the swing vote. So that although we know it remains true that at least 80%, maybe more, of Guyana will blindly vote along ethnic lines, because they are so closely balanced, even that small 10 or 15 or 20% of independent voters who have rejected it are finally enough, numerically speaking, to carry the swing, as the AFC did after 2011. So that for the first time in Guyana's history, the government in power had a minority in parliament. And that is what the AFC taught us. Now, Guyana's taught AFC something. What Guyana's taught the AFC, what that small margin of independent voters has taught the AFC, is that they don't own us. Because we are independent thinkers, the AFC was obligated not to betray the trust that we put in them, was obligated to honor the promises we made to them because we are independent voters. We don't vote for them because they look like us. And therefore, when they betrayed that trust, when they broke that oath, they have entirely lost their voter base and they have imploded as a result. They never had the luxury that ANUG have and that PPP have, that no matter how badly they treat their own people, those people will still vote for them. The independent-minded voter voted for AFC in a rejection of ethnic politics and in the hope that AFC provided something better. And when they realized they had been deceived, AFC imploded. AFC now has no voter base. And the question then arises, what happens to this group, this minority group of independent thinkers? I don't believe that minority group of independent thinkers is willing to go back to the ethnic enclaves. I don't think they want to go back to the enclave of the PPP or the enclave of the ANUG. I think that they continue to reject ethnic politics and they're looking for an alternative. Now, as you say, the view remains that the AFC left a bad wicket so that any party that comes along behind may find it difficult to persuade those same jaded, skeptical voters to try again. But what I say to you is that there's no choice. Because having lost faith in the AFC, either you go back and you kowtow and you acknowledge that one of the two parties will win and you allow the fight between them, knowing that the result will be that the winner in our winner-take-all system will also enjoy majority in parliament and therefore will be an elected dictatorship, as the PNC was until 92 and as the PPP was until 2011. That is intolerable, and I think the independent voters know that.
So Tim, you're saying...
So you've asked why ANUG?
Yeah, go on.
My history is with AFC. You talk about Kemraj and Raphael. When they were to be formed, they consulted me, and I happily helped. I put together the paperwork for them. I was their returning officer in their internal elections. I did the best I can to support, making it clear to them at the time that I'm a lawyer, not a politician, don't want to be in politics, but I was thrilled that they were taking the step they were taking to be an independent voice, the balance of power between the two. So I am like every other AFC supporter who supported in 2011, who supported maybe with a bit more reluctance in 2015, and who is now disappointed and is no longer supporting. Because what we've seen is that they've been subsumed and they have betrayed the trust. And they are now part and parcel of us having received an exchange rather than a change in 2015. So having been disappointed by the AFC, I am responsible. I will take, I'll acknowledge responsibility for it. I asked a group of colleagues if they didn't agree with me that if we just left things alone and allowed the AFC to continue with APNU in the exchange while the PPP remain on the other side, the end result would be a fight between the two and Guyana would lose because the winner-take-all system would allow one of them to have absolute dominance. And we decided that we would write the AFC and we would say to them, you made these promises. You promised never to form a coalition. You promised to have constitutional reform in 100 days. Unless you take steps publicly now towards constitutional reform, we will carry our concerns directly to the people. We will replace you if we can. Because you have disappointed us, you have betrayed Guyana, and it is Guyana cannot lose hope. We cannot despair. The only alternative is for another party to step forward to do what the AFC should have done.
But Timothy, that's exactly what I'm trying to get at. The thing is, Ramjatan and Nagamutu were discarded by the PPP, and as seen over the last 5 years, they were only interested in revenge against that party. Why should Guyanese voters think that Ramkaran, your candidate, and Henry Jeffrey, a founding member, they're not about to seek revenge to the respective party as well? Why would Guyanese put trust in ANUG, knowing that these two founding members were also, in the case of Henry Jeffrey, he's a member of the PNC, then he was a part of the civic component, and of course Ramkaran was a member of the PP for all his life.
Okay. I'll answer that in turn, although I don't pretend to speak for either of them. I've known both of those gentlemen for over 20 years. Ralph's story, Ramkaran's story, is that he followed his father in the footsteps of the PPP. And under Chedi Jagan, he did the best he could for the PPP. And when the PPP grew in corruption after the death of Jagan, he is the person who publicly, in the newspapers, said that the corruption was growing and that the PPP needed to change. And as a result of the maelstrom that occurred, when he, a member of the PPP, accused his own people of corruption and said it has to change, it's growing out of hand, he left the party. That is a very different situation from someone who opportunistically, after Jagan died, tried to claim some kind of inheritance that he should be president after Jagan and was therefore thrown out of the party. Ramkaran left the party on moral grounds because he saw the corruption that was growing. Similarly, Henry Jeffrey, as I say, I've known him over 20 years. The very fact that he was in Civic shows his rejection of the excesses of the PNC and his need to try to find a balance. Now, both of those gentlemen, if I always say that you measure economics and you take a test of any country's economic growth by the size of the house they live in. And I will challenge you to look at the house that Irfan lives in now compared to what he lived in 10 years ago. And look at the house Jagdeo lives in now compared to what he lived in 20 years ago. And look at the house that Ramkaran lives in now and that Henry Jeffrey lives in now. The house is the same size house. They live in the same house. They haven't used their position in office to aggrandize themselves, to improve themselves economically. They have honestly done an honest day's work as best they could. And in Ramkaran's case, when he saw the corruption, he walked away. In Jeffrey's case, when he saw he couldn't change from within, he walked away. And they are now, as patriotic Guyanese, saying, there is light at the end of the tunnel. Do not despair because the AFC has betrayed the independent voters. We can do what the AFC did. We can get a minority government in parliament, and with the swing vote, we can do what AFC should have done and begin to implement the reform that is so important, so crucial to erode and wither away the winner-take-all system that engenders corruption in Guyana. Okay. And that is what I want to you and to voters. Do not despair. Understand. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically you're saying that we can't compare Nagamutu and Ramjatan to what Ramkaran and Jeffrey, they're two different things altogether.
Certainly not.
Okay.
And more than that, if you don't buy the moral argument, then buy the common sense argument that if you see the collapse that's happened with AFC, we would have to be a pack of idiots to do what AFC did.
Yeah, that makes sense too. Another question before we get, I know we're here to talk about the manifesto, if you don't mind, Tim, but before we get into that, recently in the news, I think it was in January, I remember, maybe early February, the Liberty and Justice Party, the New Movement, and ANUG submitted to GCOM a plan to join their list for the purpose of seat allocation in the National Assembly. Explain to our viewers what really this is and what does the three parties expect to come out of this scenario?
All right. Now, the three parties, Liberty and Justice, New Movement, and ANUG, we differ slightly in economic issues and social issues and that kind of thing. Not any radical difference, not any chasm between us, but there are differences, and everyone has started their own party. But we have one central dominant theme that has kept us friendly and kept us united, and it is the rejection of ethnopolitics. It takes a lot to start a small party in Guyana. First of all, you're guaranteed a cost down from 90% of the population. That is guaranteed. Second of all, you risk victimization from those in power, and you risk alienation even from the large opposition party. So it takes courage, it takes some grit, it takes some stamina, and it takes a certain madness maybe. But you do it because you have rejected the ethnopolitics that the two parties represent. And Liberty and Justice and the New Movement share that goal with ANUG and United Guyana, that we need to make sure that there is not an absolute winner in our winner-take-all elections where either the PPP or APNU gets more than 51% of the votes so that they control parliament. That is so essential. And for that reason, we devised this formula, which is contemplated by the Representation of the People Act, where in order to prevent any possibility that one of those two large parties might get a seat that we might possibly get, we have combined our votes, any votes that the people are willing to give us, How this works is that suppose if you divide up the votes cast in Guyana, it takes 5,000 or 6,000 votes to get one seat in parliament. If the new movement gets only 3,000 votes and Liberty and Justice get only 4,000 votes, those votes are wasted and they get no seats. But by this combination, together, that 3,000 and 4,000 are 7,000 votes, and they are able to take a seat in parliament with the 7,000 votes. And by doing so, deprive either APNU or PPP of that seat, so that they share their votes and they share that seat, and therefore increase their chances. The whole object of this exercise is to get as many seats as possible away from PPP and away from APNU to increase the chance that we will get that swing vote in Parliament, which is so critical and with which we can do so much good. That is what the combination is about.
Great explanation. So what you're saying then, Tim, is that with these independent voters who might think of not voting for the PPP or APNU, and if they vote for one of these parties, the New Movement, ANUG, or the Liberty and Justice Party, then their vote will not necessarily be wasted. The question then is why didn't
certainly will not be wasted.
Why didn't the other parties, the other small new parties, why didn't they come on board to do exactly that, knowing that if someone like Change Guyana, for instance, or Citizen Initiative, but if they cannot get 5,000 votes, that vote they got will really go to waste. But together with a joiner list, that would have been a massive thing. And I did a letter in the paper recently, I don't know if you saw it, that in last election, 2015, if PPP and the United Force had a joiner list, Region 8 seat would have been theirs. Because they got one seat less than APNU, but the United Force got 40-something votes. And together, they would have win that seat. So the thing is, this is such a great part of our electoral process, but for the first time, we're hearing about this joiner list. Never happened before.
And you're absolutely right. The last election was on a knife's edge. It was a razor-thin victory. And that is why I'm saying to those past AFC supporters, don't despair, don't lose hope. Because it's so close between APNU and the PPP, we have a very, very good chance. As long as you turn out on election day and put your ex next to a third party, we have a good chance of carrying that swing vote and being the balance of power in Parliament.
But
now
then
it's not the time.
But Tim, sorry to cut you, but it's not all third parties. Only 3 joined the list. Your party, ANUG, the New Movement, and the Liberty and Justice Party.
And you specifically asked me about Change and Citizens Initiative. I don't want to criticize them because it may be that someone watching the show now does not feel an attraction to one of the 3 parties, to the New Movement, to ANUG United Guyana, or to Liberty and Justice. That is your right. But to that person, I say, please, don't stay home and don't vote for one of the big 2. Go and vote for another third party. Because if any of those other 2 third parties gets 5,000 or 6,000 votes so as to get a seat, that is a seat that APNU doesn't get and that the PPP doesn't get. So we have vigilantly been very, very careful this election. We are not criticizing any of the other small parties because we feel that those small parties were created as a rejection of ethnic politics, and whether we agree with their policies, whether we like the people or not, they've shown courage, they're trying their best, and if you agree to reject the large 2, vote for any of them. We hope you vote for ANUG United Guyana, but I do not want to criticize any of the other 2. What I will say is I do believe that they were very optimistic in terms of their chances and their resources and their reach. And if they are right, power to them, good for them. But for me, I have always been a cautious person, and I was not willing to see if we get 7,000 votes, so 5,000 give us a seat, there's still 2,000 left over. I don't want those 2,000 wasted if those 2,000 leftover votes can be contributed to the New Movement votes and Liberty and Justice Party votes so as to give them a seat and deprive the large 2 parties of a seat. We have to use all the votes that we get to make sure we get this swing vote in Parliament. We cannot waste votes, and that is what this is about.
I want to ask you one more question before we get into the manifesto, but someone asked me to tell you this, that it might be wishful thinking to stop the PPP from getting a majority. According to them, it is leading in regions 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and 9, and they're fighting the Liberty and Justice Party tooth and nail in region 8. Also, the AFC base was on the quarantine, and those voters have gone back to the PPP. So is that the independent voters that we're talking about, that we want to vote for the new party and not for the PPP or the APNU?
Charles, the person who told you that, I would bet money, is a PPP supporter. You see, what both parties have been doing is both parties have been saying to all and sundry, followers and enemies alike, they've been saying, don't worry with the small parties, they don't matter, in the hope that the swing voters despair, in the hope that the swing voters give up hope and either go back to their ethnic enclave or stay home. The two parties want to maintain their monopoly of the political landscape. So the PPP has been coming out with polls saying, look, we're winning, got absolute majority. The APNU have been coming out with polls saying we got absolute majority. There are enough independent voters in this country to change that. That was the case years ago when the AFC first demonstrated that we had enough to create a minority government in Parliament. And it is more so the case now because people have realized that instead of a change, we had an exchange. And more people are fed up with both sides. This isn't a hope, this is an expectation. Those two parties will not get a majority. And when they fail to get the majority, there will be a transformation of our society and our economy. People will feel empowered. People will realize at long last, we're not blind slaves, we're not blind servants following. We can put them out. We can put one out, we can put the other out, and voters will be empowered. This is an opportunity. This isn't a time for despair. So when I hear your witness saying, oh, the PPP are doing well here, there, and everywhere, well, APNU is saying the same thing on the other side, and it's all nonsense.
Okay, one more question, then we go to your manifesto, Tim, if you don't mind. Is ANUG concerned, as I said in my opening monologue, the population with approximately 780,000 people, we have on the voters list, the final voters list, 661,028 names. Is ANUG concerned about this large number of names on the final voters list? And in addition to that, was the addition of the names from the aborted households registration a concern to ANUG? Because those names, we are told, was added to the existing list to get the final voters list. Are people registered twice in this final voters list, in ANUG's view?
Of course we're concerned. Who wouldn't be concerned? How can you, in a country of 780,000 people, have 660,000 people ready to vote? That means we've got 100,000 children under 18. I mean, it's ridiculous. We know we live in a society where there are more children than adults, so it's a very young population. So something is obviously wrong. What's unfortunate, and this again goes back to the two large parties, is that those two parties designed this system, but neither of them accepted or admitted accountability, admitted responsibility for where we are now. How the system is designed is that every birth in Guyana is mandated by law to be registered. So you're born in the hospital or you're born wherever, and the midwife or the doctor records it and sends a record of your birth to the post office. And at the post office, they put it on the list, the national list. When you reach the age where you can vote, your name is transferred to the voters list. So in terms of people being born and being put onto the list from age 14, it works well. At the other end of that list is when you die, you should fall off the list. And again, the law provides that when a person dies, a doctor certifies the death, and that certification goes to the same post office, and they should take the name off the list. But what's happened in Guyana, as you know, where you live, most Guyanese don't die in Guyana. Most Guyanese migrate because of the ridiculous leadership we've had over 50 years, and they die abroad. So that system is flawed inherently. and the names of deceased persons are not taken off the list, and the list grows and grows and grows. People being born going on, but no deceased persons or not enough deceased persons being taken off. The reason that I object to the hypocrisy of the two parties is that last year, the entire country will remember that President Granger stoutly said the list is bloated. He said it in a way that implied some kind of fraud. And all the party loyalists took up the hue and the cry, the list is bloated, and used it as an excuse to postpone elections. At that time, the list had only 550,000 names. Now you don't hear him saying the list is bloated. The list has 660,000. That is hypocrisy in the worst sense, because it aggravates and polarizes people and makes them think about fraud and increases suspicions from either side. But there's no effort to solve the problem. And the problem remains, and the problem is larger, from 550,000 to 660,000, and our leaders who should be leading us and solving problems have exacerbated the problem, haven't solved it.
Because I want to go into your manifesto, but leading up to that question is, are you telling me, based on what you just said, that it's likely that the PNC or ANUG is now looking to go back to 68 and those elections when they were rigged? Is that what we're looking at?
You know, in our society, we like to point fingers and therefore avoid responsibility. But the reality is that if either of those two parties has their way and they think they're going to lose, either of them will cheat. Both of them will cheat. So let's not ascribe responsibility in one direction only. Because I personally have heard of stuffing of ballots in 2015 in some areas over the river by the then incumbent government. So both sides are morally culpable, and neither side has tried to solve the problem. If you want to be honest, if you want to show integrity, you try to solve the problem. If now we have names that are on the list of deceased persons, the door is opened to ballot stuffing. Because at any polling station, if you have 20 people that are alive to go there, you may have 25 people on the list, because 5 of the deceased people were not taken off the list. And that is a recipe for a problem. I had made the suggestion that it would be very easy to have closed caption TVs on each of the 2,500 polling stations. It costs a couple hundred US for each of them. It's well worth the money. So that you record during the day every phase going in, every phase going out, the number of people going in and going out, and you can do a correlation that way. That's a possible
I think, Tim, for us to do that, we'll have to change the composition of the Elections Commission, and I hope that after the election of next Monday, that we will have, well, Monday after next, we will have a new parliament that will really have constitutional reform, and that will be part of it. Let's get to your manifesto, if you don't mind.
Sure.
In your introduction, you said it is realistic because based upon the history of our ethnic voting, ANUG does not expect to win the 2020 elections, and thus its programs and promises are based on what it can actually deliver to the Guyanese people by winning a small number of seats it believed it possible to win. My question to you is, where do you expect to get these votes from for your seat? Is it geographic or national top-up seats?
A bit of both. If you look historically at where the AFC support came from, it came from Region 4, it came from Region 6, and then to a lesser extent it came from elsewhere. They won 10,000 votes in Region 6. They won about 12,000 in Region 4 in 2011. And those are the areas of urban central areas, the areas where you have the middle class, the independent thinkers, the people who are rejecting the two parties. But more than that, they also got some votes in some outlying areas. And something I have found, and I found it more so in the last 6 months, the people in the outlying areas far away from the city are not blindly reliant on the government. They're more independent minded. They earn their own money, they live by their own wits, and therefore they are open and receptive to appreciating the difficulty of Guyana circumstances and saying, I've had enough of those two parties.
Yeah, so but let's tell me, Tim, which region and which location do you expect ANUG to get their vote base from?
We expect results in 2, 3, 4, 6, and 10. We expect results in those areas. We also believe that Bartica has shown disaffection
That's
with
region
the
7.
party that they traditionally follow. Yes, that is 7. So we have some hope for Bartica as well, but we believe that in those regions there has been a paradigm shift.
But Tim, hope is not a recipe to win the election. We got to know where the votes are coming from. And
Well, as I said,
hoping that we'll get votes from region 4 or region 6, most of the AFC voters gone back to the PPP. Region 2, they have dominated, the PPP has dominated there. Region 3, the PPP will dominate that as well. You're talking about independent voters in these regions?
you sound like you're quoting from the gentleman who just gave you his personal poll. But as I said, the AFC supporters that I spoke to are not happily going back to either of the two ethnic camps. So although they're disillusioned, they're not happily going back. I believe that in Region 4, there are a lot of votes, a lot of AFC supporters will support a third party. I believe that in Region 6, although you said they've gone back to the PPP, I don't agree with you. The people we spoke to in Region 6, although they are absolutely dismayed at the economic policy of this government and how this government has destroyed the economic structure in Berbice, that has not persuaded them to blindly go to ethnic politics. They are still looking for solutions. And in Region 5, there's an independence of spirit, and I see, and when I talk to people there, they want alternatives. They have seen the PPP, now they've seen ANUG. They want alternatives.
Do you think ANUG will win a geographic seat?
Certainly.
And how many top-up seats you're looking at?
Well, the beauty of democracy and the danger of democracy, it's always a gamble. I think that among TNM, ANUG, and Liberty and Justice Party, there are 3 seats there, but it turns on the independent voters. I think that inroads have been made. I think there's genuine disaffection with the 2 large parties, and it turns on the independent voters understanding that hope is not lost because of the collapse of the AFC. They have to try again, and I think they're understanding that. And
so based on your manifesto, what you're telling us is that these seats you're talking about is the joiner list seats with ANUG, with TNM, and with the Liberty and Justice Party.
It's not either or. You're asking that question as if it's either you're getting seats on your own or you're getting seats under the joiner.
Which one will it be?
If you get 2,000 seats, if you get 2,000 votes, there are no seats.
Right.
But if you get 2,000 and the new movement gets 3,000, between the two of you, you share a seat.
That's correct.
But the numbers increase. If you get 12,000, you get 2 seats, if it's 5,000 a seat, but you still have 2,000 votes left over. Those 2,000 votes might allow you to share a 3rd seat with the new movement if they get 3,000 votes.
That's an excellent strategy, actually. I agree with you. That's an excellent strategy, and I was really surprised that only this election we knew that Section 22 of the Representation of People Act allowed for that, joiner list. Another question to you on your manifesto, Tim, is, I'm quoting your manifesto, it says that realism coupled with the fact that it was formed not to dislodge the 2 larger ethnic political parties, but to force them to govern together. My question to you is, why such a statement? Why do you not want to dislodge the parties? And then the other question is, why should the voters want you to be that referee and not the voter themselves? To ensure that the PPP and the ANUG work together.
You don't go to play football with a cricket bat. You have to know the rules of the game, and you have to accept what the rules of the game are and what your capabilities are in that game following the rules. If a party, if a third party, a new party, comes to you and talks to you about what they will do when they're in government, they're lying to you. Because if they don't know that 80 or 90% of Guyana continue to vote along ethnic lines, then they're deceiving themselves, or they're insane, or they're trying to deceive you. So we know the rules of the game. The rules of the game are ANUG will get 40%, PPP will get 40% or thereabouts, and it is that remaining number of votes that hopefully will go to third parties to create a balance of power. And that's the rules of the game. So once you know those are the rules of the game, the question to ask is, what can you do with those few seats in a swing vote? That's the question, not what will you do when you're in government. So when I hear the new party saying, oh, we'll change taxes and we will have this policy and we'll build an oil refinery and that kind of thing, they're either insane or they're lying to the people. The question is, what can we do, given that the rules of the game will give us a few seats but will not give us the government? And that is what our manifesto says to the people. This is what we can do in the rules of the game as is right now.
The Liberty and Justice Party, as you know, Tim, they have problems with getting enough funds to campaign in the regions for which they are more strong in, like Region 1, Region 7, Region 8, Region 9, and to an extent Region 7, and of course Region 10 as well. If the idea is that these parties, whether the New Movement, the ANUG and the LJP, will join their votes together, why don't the ANUG finance some of the operations of the Liberty and Justice Party?
Well, tell me, Charles, how much money have you donated to ANUG? You're making an enormous assumption there. We're operating on a shoestring budget like everyone else. And
are you telling me that ANUG is also a poor man party?
We are being very parsimonious with our expenditure. We're rubbing every coin carefully before it's spent, and we're barely making it. The amount of money that the two large parties have spent on flags in Georgetown alone is probably 3 times our entire budget over the last year. Let alone the cost of that they're spending on radio ads and TV ads and the firms that they have hired to carry their campaign strategy online. We are on a shoestring budget. We are not one of the big parties.
But if you had pulled your resources together, the New Movement, ANUG, and the LJP, and concentrate on areas that your strength is, wouldn't that be a more positive result, hopefully, that after the election that the people will know that, hey, vote for us, and at the end of the day, we'll have joined our votes together and we'll have 3 seats, 4 seats, 5 seats, and that will be a game changer in Parliament.
Well, again, you talk about pooling resources, and I have to ask you again, how much did you contribute to the party? Because you're making an assumption about what those resources are.
I did contribute to parties in Guyana, contested election, but I will not discuss that in this program. Okay, one question again in your manifesto, Tim, is this. You said, ANUG revolutionary credential rests not only upon the 2 orientations just outlined above that we talk about, instead it takes ethnic voting as normal, which we know happening in Guyana, and promises that if it wins the small number of seats that is necessary for it to hold a parliamentary balance, it will set about establishing different things. Isn't this what Ravidev did in Roar? He was trying to get, realizing that Guyana vote along ethnic lines, the Indian Guyanese by and large vote for the PPP, and the African Guyanese by and large vote for PNC. And he was saying, after the voting is done, let us work together to run the country. Is that the same thing you're doing? And the question is, Ravidev was rejected by the electorate. He got 1 seat in 1 election, and then after that he got no seat.
Yeah, Ravidev was talking about a system of federalism that was obscure enough that I think that it didn't resonate with most Guyanese. He was trying. You even got the impression that he was trying to separate the races by virtue of constituencies. I know that's not what he was trying to do, but when you heard him speak, you got that impression. This is what we're trying to do, and it is so simple. I'm sure if you followed our newspapers, you saw a couple of weeks ago there was a mighty debate between Tony Vera and Enrico Wolford. Enrico Wolford, as you know, is very instrumental and powerful now in the NCN and the state-owned media. And Tony Vera has aligned himself with the PPP and is outside, a media man who is outside, and was criticizing the state-owned media for the amount of airtime they gave to the government, the ruling party, as opposed to the amount of airtime they gave to the opposition. And Enrico Wolford was trying to justify it by all kind of arcane and interesting arguments. Now, I cite that specific problem because this is ANUG's solution. This is the solution by a new united Guyana. With a swing vote in Parliament, you propose legislation that the state-owned corporations shall be run by a board of directors. Each shall be run by a board of directors comprising 5 individuals, 2 appointed by the government, 2 appointed by the largest opposition, and 2 appointed by the largest third party, and 1 appointed by the largest third party. So you have 2 PPP, 2 APNU, and 1 third party on the board of NCN. Immediately, you don't have a situation like where our friend from AFC was fired when they didn't like what he did. Because to be fired, 3 people there got to agree on that board of 5. You won't be fired for political reasons. You'll be hired because you're professional. You'll be fired because you're unprofessional. You'll be there based on merit, and you'll be able to do your job professionally.
And is that something that ANUG will recommend for every constitutional commission and every board in Guyana, that we have that kind of spread?
Every last one, because that is a small microcosm of the larger system of constitutional reform that we have in mind.
Oh, that's
so
excellent.
That you have the Guyana Gold Board shall be run 2 PPP, 2 APNU, 1 third party. Guyana Energy Agency, 2 PPP, 2 APNU, 1 third party. Every last board you have in mind. Central Housing. If the Central Housing Board comprised a majority that was not government, there would never be a Pradoville 2, where ministers who were not entitled got excellent pieces of land at dirt cheap prices.
And the same thing will apply to the University of Guyana as well?
Absolutely. Every institution. So that immediately decisions are made based on merit. People are hired based on merit. Your professionals can be professional. They're not afraid of losing their job.
And Tim, I know we are running out of time for tonight. I know we'll continue this segment next week, and I hope that the other viewers will join in. But I just want to get to your consensual democracy we just talked about there. But you said in your manifesto, however, our consensual nature means that such positions are not cast in stone and thus are placed below essentially as input in the process. Does that mean that you will waive on everything? I think some of your principles should be written on stone. But what you're saying here in the manifesto is that everything is up for challenge, and if someone disagrees, we will waive that and look at something else. Is that what the concept is?
No, not at all. We're not dictators. We can't be. We're a minority. We represent the minority group of the society.
You got to stand on principles. So your principle is...
Let me answer your question, Charles.
Yeah, okay.
I heard your question loud and clear.
Okay.
We're a minority group. We represent a minority group, the minority group of independent voters. So when we present our ideas and our policies and our plans to the 2 large parties in Parliament, there has to be a discussion among 3. And there has to be consensus in terms of the implementation, because we don't have majority vote in Parliament. That is a very different question from what is cast in stone. And what is cast in stone is that we will fight for constitutional reform. We will never form a coalition with any of the 2 large parties under any circumstances. We will never accept any ministerial position or any other such position when one of the 2 large parties is in power. And we will fight for constitutional reform so that there is shared inclusive governance and representation of every single Guyanese by the governmental system. That is cast in stone. So they're 2 very different conversations.
Excellent. I got a note here again. I just want to read it to you if you don't mind. It says, since 1992, the PNC have an average of 42% of the votes cast. You said 40-40, right? And they said the PPP had sometimes 50%, sometimes 48%, and so on. Is it likely the PPP will have below 50% of the votes? Because based on what we're hearing is that the PPP might have 50% of the votes cast. Not necessarily mean they will have majority in Parliament, but they will have 50% of the votes cast. Is that how you're reading it?
Charles, it's funny, eh? If you speak to a PPP supporter, he's going to tell you that. But I was in the barber shop last week, and I'm Afro-Guyanese, my barber is black. I went in and sat down in the chair, he's cutting my hair, and I'm asking him about it. I'm trying to persuade him not to vote APNU, to vote for a small party. And he is adamantly convinced that this government has made enough progress. Don't stop the progress. Has done enough that they will get a clear majority. Everyone he speaks to, because who does he speak to? He speaks to people that look like him, people who will vote along ethnic lines like him, adamantly convinced that this government is going to win a majority. And if you go in another shop, the PPP supporter is adamantly convinced, using all kinds of logic like you just used, that the PPP will win a majority. It is razor thin. And that is what we learned from the AFC, that it is the swing voters, the independent-minded voters, that now have the power in this country.
And that point
And
is well
they need
taken.
to flex their muscle and demonstrate that power.
Tim, you're correct, because in my letter I did to the newspaper not too long ago, in 2006 election, the PPP won 56% of the votes, and they got 36 seats. But if they had joined a list in that year, they would get 56% of the vote and got only 32 seats. So the thing is, you can get 50% of the vote and still not have a majority in parliament. And that's, we're hoping.
It's an interesting point.
And you're hoping that the independent voters, which range realistically between 5 and 8%, that they will make a difference in this election. Is that what we're hoping?
Absolutely. And let me remind you, Lennox is doing very good work in regions 8 and 9.
Before we leave tonight, I know time is running out, who is ANUG Prime Minister candidate? Do they have one?
No, and it's not relevant. We're not going to get into government.
Okay, so that's the rationale for not...
We have a presidential candidate because it's required by the Constitution. But I think everyone knows Ralph is not going to be president after this election.
Well,
that is why I smile when people talk about aggrandizement and trying to get power.
Yeah, but look at this scenario. But Tim, I know you just said there, but listen to this. You've heard in St. Vincent with Mitchell, when each party had 6 seats each, and he had the 1 seat, and he became prime minister with the 1 seat. Is it possible that with a minority government in Guyana after March 3rd, if ANUG is that 1 seat difference, will ANUG say, okay, I can join a new government, but you make me the president?
Well, part of the system created by the 2 parties makes that constitutionally impossible, because our constitution mandates that the party that wins the most seats must take the presidency.
But did not say that the president cannot resign and appoint the prime minister. It didn't say that. The president can resign.
The party.
Yeah, I know. The party that wins the most vote win the presidency. But it didn't say that the president, the person who's now the president, cannot resign and give the prime minister the position of president. So that can be a possibility.
But it's from his list of candidates, isn't it, Charles?
I know. But if, let's say, APNU wins the majority vote and they get the presidency, or PPP win the majority, get the presidency, but there is no majority in parliament, and ANUG is the party with that 1 seat or 2 seats that will give them a majority in parliament, can ANUG then says, okay, listen, Mr. President, whoever the president is, make me prime minister, appoint me prime minister. When I appoint prime minister, you resign and I'll become the president, and then we'll run the government together.
That is only possible where all the parties agree to constitutional reform immediately.
Mr. Timothy.
Because that is cast in stone.
It has been such a great pleasure talking to you. You're such a great son of Guyana, and I wish that Guyanese could listen to you tonight, and that group of Guyanese who will vote independent will determine the future of our country. With oil on stream right now and with what's going on around the world, I think Guyana need that new direction. And if they can vote for these small parties, ANUG, the new movement, Liberty and Justice Party, and those votes can come together after the election for the allocation of seats, I think with 3 seats, that will be a really master plan parliament where neither parties might have a majority, and we're hoping that that might be the result after the election. I know we did not get into the detail of your manifesto, but I think next week we'll meet again and we'll talk some more detail on your manifesto and some of the things that you promised if you go into parliament. And you say you cannot get into the government, but you will in parliament, and what are some of the things that you will push in parliament. So again, I want to thank you, Tim. Any closing remarks?
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you to you for moderating and to Globespan for having me on. I look forward to our second discussion on the manifesto and on the details of what can be done and what needs to be done in Guyana to improve the living conditions and the lives of people. And I want to remind supporters that the difference between APNU and PPP in terms of numbers is razor thin, and you can make the change. The solution is here, and it is now. You need to vote for a third party because you will succeed.
And the solution is in the voter's hand. Thank you so much, Tim. And again, for our viewers, we want to thank you for being a part of us tonight. And again, to our Hindu brothers and sisters around Guyana and around the United States and around the world, we want to wish you all the best in this very, very revered holiday today, or your festival of Mahashivratri. So again, here from New York, again, we want to thank Devin, our technical specialist, and the Nohar Singh for making this possible. Join us next week when Timothy will be back on to go through, and hopefully maybe someone else will go through the details of their manifesto, so the Guyanese will have an opportunity to determine what direction they want our country to go. Again, Tim, thank you very much, and to our viewers, good night here from New York.